I look forward to hearing your perspectives as we discuss who gets to tell the story of craft, who benefits from production of craft, and how we can practice advocacy in this sphere. Okay, I'm going to switch off my microphone and my video. I can see less than 10 people at this moment. So why don't you guys start?
Uh, Hi, Pritha. I just wanted to ask, since you mentioned two documents, there's just one agenda mentioned. Is there something else also?
I had uploaded, I mean, both the documents are about the rules of participation, so it isn't anything extra.
Okay. Uh, so I may start if that's not an issue. Hi, I'm Shivani, and I have been working in fashion for like last 2 years, and I've also gotten into the education of it, and I shifted towards getting into business side of things. And while I was interviewing for those things, I got a question that with regards to Prada's Kolhapuri chappals that created a fiasco in terms of is it like how to what extent is it a cultural appropriation, and even at that time they asked me the same question, and my opinion regarding that is that we do see a lot of cultural appropriation in terms of Indian crafts and heritage, which gets glamorized and gets westernized outside of India and also used in a context way separated from how it's used in the country itself. But in that regard, it also contributes to the popularity of the craft itself or popularity of that particular visual itself, which normalizes or I would say also in a way discourages racism against those symbolic visuals which are being borrowed from the country itself. It is a messed up way to normalize that in a way that until it is adopted by the Westerners, it's not normalized, but it also creates a much more global uh, intent of that particular aesthetic or that particular craft that we are looking at. So I would like anybody to chime in for that.
Well, actually, I think there's a very fine line between what we call appropriation and inspiration, right? Like everybody, there is some inspiration from somewhere. And not and none of us, especially now, are not living in a very closed shell, is what I feel. Earlier, of course, the people would not even go outside the villages. But now we're really, I mean, it's become like a global village, and thanks to internet, I think everybody is getting inspired, even the villagers. And the craft is also really changing. Like even if you think like Ajrak, I remember a couple of years back, there were a few people, like I mean, my family, I was the one who used to go to Dastakar exhibits. I used to be the one wearing it. But now it's become so common. You get in screen print, you get block print, you get just regular print. So Ajrak has now just suddenly taken over, right? And now they're even changing their motifs. They're not stuck to the old motifs. So I think so they're getting inspired from everything. So now they use Pichwai paintings, right? That's the latest in Ajrak. They're using the cow motif and the art, which is a Pichwai art. So I mean, so then do you ask them, are the appropriation of something? Why you're not sticking to the old block? So I mean, everybody is changing since I mean, so I think, but there should be a line where you are, are they calling it their own? Are they mentioning it inspired? That sort of a thing. And I think bigger firms, like the corporate firms, can definitely say they are inspired. But the smaller people, they are not going to kahin dekha, they have copied. So I think we also should not be too touchy, I think, about everything. Of course, now we have a GI tag and, things like that. But I don't know. I think we should just. I think culture. The more people accept, the more people it becomes common. It's something nice to feel like how we feel happy when you see others wearing your costume or your cultural dress. Especially in India, when they say every 2 kilometers the food changes, the dress changes, everything changes. But now it's becoming quite. I mean, I may sound really ancient, but if you ask me 2 decades back when I was in college, nobody wore the shalwar kameez. I'm from Hyderabad, basically. So I'm Asia from Hyderabad. And in my college, in my graduation, just two of us used to wear shalwar kameez. There's one girl who was a Punjabi, and me, I have some Punjabi lineage. So I used to be the other Hyderabadi wearing shalwar kameez. Everybody else wore lehenga blouses, the long Telugu style lehenga blouses, or what we call a half sari. I don't know if you've heard that. but we have this term called a half sari. That's a lehenga and a blouse, and then you wear a half dupatta like a sari on it. That was thing. Today, when you see everybody in college across board is dressed either in western or shalwar kameez. So lehenga onis is now only for weddings. So it changes every 20 years, I think now. Called Punjab, not even, it was called Punjabi dress when I was in college. So I don't know if that answers your, I'm rambling or does that answer your question.
No, it was just a
Anybody else want to?
discussion. I just want to add one thing also, because even in this fiasco itself, it eventually led for the Dalit workers to get paid at least additionally for their craft, because Prada wanted to create some accountability for themselves. And then we also see Ralph Lauren doing a good job with giving supplies to Madras Checks weavers. So like, in a way, if somebody is actually giving credit better than what our country is giving to them, I think I don't see a problem in that personally. So
Sorry, can I come
Sure.
in? Oh, go ahead, Anaka.
I think that Shivani is raising a really interesting point. I don't know whether you're raising it directly or indirectly, but something that stood out to me with that whole debacle is that, and it stands out to me very often actually when designers or people who come from a formal anglicized education speak about artisans, which is not from a maker's perspective. There's a certain amount of collective, like at a collective level, there's a certain amount of self-loathing and self-hatred that Indians have for being Indian. And there's post-colonial theories about this. There's a lot of stuff that's been written about this academically. And so it ties into the whole, what you called messed up, rightly so. It ties into the whole aspect of what is it that we see aspirational. I do think it's possible that had a Bollywood star got a Kolhapuri chappal design, then it might have created a similar wave. It doesn't have to be from abroad, but it also gets at the fact that if it's everyday people, then maybe we don't consider that aspirational. And coming back to tying it also to Asia's point about the salwar kurta, I mean, there was a time when it was considered very, I don't know, you weren't considered modern if that's what you wore. And times have changed so much that I think today, if you wear something that has a nod to something traditional, but still has something that shows that you are well-traveled, urban, sophisticated in some way, then that's like has far more aspirational value. And it's interesting because fashion is supposed to also be a cultural comment on what we consider value at the time. But yeah, that's a very interesting point that you raised, Shivani. Thanks, Soham.
No worries. Sorry, is anyone going to? All right. Couple of points. I think since we're talking about the collab, well, I am no way a craft person. I've gained craft from my family. I've seen my mom wear, my dad wear things which are very traditional. I've seen my grandparents, as anyone else has, right? My take as someone who works in a behavior science space, as a sociologist, as almost anthropology lens, is, are we looking for credit? Is that what we want? If that's the case, any brand can take up anywhere from the world and give you a credit, right? Is that what we want, right? Secondly, the important part is craft travels context, right? It's dictated by what the context is. Like I can give you an example, like indigo as an element, it travels across South Asia, from Japan, West Africa, India, and everywhere. Where do you place that? Do we take the credit? Do people from Gujarat, Rajasthan,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Can you repeat the name?
Sorry, I was talking about indigo.
Oh, okay.
As a color, as a pigment, and the application of that pigment is spread across, right? So how do we place a pin saying this is the community which takes credit for that, right? If I go back a few hundred years, the people who have colonized us, they have taken craft from us and they have used it on their garments. The French has done that. The Britishers has done that. No one called it out, right? Which brings me to my second point is how are we as a market, which I think Anaka mentioned briefly, and I'll probably elaborate, is how much are we proud of our own cultural heritage, right? Suddenly you see Kolhapuri, you probably have not worn Kolhapuri, right? Or anyone has not worn Kolhapuri, and suddenly the internet flicks out and like, oh my God, Kolhapuri is such a thing. They've stolen us. What do you know about Kolhapuri? Have you walked a mile in Kolhapuri? No, most people have not. But then, like because we have internet, there's something called, we call it slacktivism, which is basically you say words because you have the internet and you like to protest and rebel because it's give you a purpose, right? And a lot of people do that because, and that creates a hype and all those things. Mm. Shivani, when you said it that Prada went along and gave credit for the Karapri, they did not do that. They have always done that. It's just the internet caught along now. Like, do you think the Prada came to India and then they pulled out 5 artisans and they're like, okay, we'll pay you nominal wage and then you make runway material? No. It's a yes, there's one deficit what I see in our market with regards to craft is we don't have a very strong agenda policy around holding our artisans onto the craft market, and hence that becomes a loophole for any other markets to penetrate and take our work, right? That's a loophole that we can argue in, but it can't be that no provider did not. They always have paid, and hence many other, like there are a lot of good French houses, artisans that I personally have seen. uh, they work with a lot of people in Chennai, in southern India, to
Yeah.
work hundreds of things, and they
Embroidery.
have been coming. It just because the internet didn't catch up doesn't mean. uh, and the same thing with the jhumkas and all those things. I'm like, you need to take a beater and think like, okay, calm down, right? We
Yeah.
don't know what's going on under the papers and the rules and things. Like just because we see one ramp walk with someone wearing a jhumka and then the internet break loose thing, oh my God, there's everyone is getting credited with that. It just, we are in that. But the second thing is also the transactional element of how far are we, eh, and how deep are we in terms of dedicating ourselves into taking our own craft to an audience that's probably will agree to it, and which brings us to parity in terms of what we think is Western or we want to westernize it, and what is Indian. I put it in a different level because we see it that way, right? It's not, as I started my point with, culture follows the context or craft follows the context. Kolhapuri is made for a context which is humid, arid, and locally sustainable. It's not meant for a British climate or any other climate. So the appropriation issue goes out of the window in that case. They can wear it as a fancy chappal, slippers, whatever they call it, but it won't sustain, right? Same thing with a lot of things like, I don't know. Okay, I'll just stop for some minute so that I can give people to.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Sushmita, and I would like to just continue the points raised by Shivani and Soham. Can I be heard?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So we talked about who does the craft belong to, and my question is, can craft really be owned? Because it could simultaneously belong to a region, a community, a country, shared human history. Because if you travel to other parts of the world, you'll find the tribal motives very similar. For example, went to the Maori villages and found them doing very similar things to what is done in Orissa villages. So that's one part of it. And we ourselves have been influenced. I mean, as Indians, we have been influenced by Persian, Central Asian, tribal motives, colonial and other local influences that get layered together for the final craft to show up. Migration plays a big part. So there was a lot of talk about chanderis from, can we call them chanderis when they are woven in Banaras, or the entire region of Bengal, Orissa, parts of now Chhattisgarh, very similar craft. So while GI tags could to some extent help preserve, but the craft does travel. And evolving is not really a bad thing really, as long as the core of the craft is preserved. I think innovation is as long as it's not disrespectful. The danger lies when we kind of erase its origin, and that's where the danger lies. As long as we are, for example, Pipli, and I'm from Odisha, and I mentioned Pipli, that what they were traditionally making is quite, to a large extent, cannot be used in many of our homes. If they did innovate, if they did use better material, I think we could uh, embrace the craft a lot better. So that's really my point. Thank you.
I think that sorry, Divya, please go ahead.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Hi.
Yeah,
We can hear
Divya.
you.
Yes,
Fine.
you're on. Yeah.
What I feel is, see, I live in Bareilly, and uh, the Zardosi craft is popularly known to originate from Lucknow, and but Bareilly has its own Zari Zardosi. If you travel to Pakistan, a lot of people have migrated from UP to Pakistan during partition times. So can we stop calling what Pakistanis make as Zardosi? Or they can't credit Lucknow or Bareilly every time they make a garment out of the same craft. Now, this is just one part of it. Even within India, we have Karvati Kinar being woven in Bengal. And I have seen a few clusters in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana which weave Python. So it's not just international brands that are appropriating other cultures, but also within our own country, we have people doing it to other craftspeople. So yes, region is important, country is important, but I think the primary ownership of craft is with craftspeople, the people who practice the craft on a day-to-day basis. I don't even think it even belongs to the people who have, stopped practicing the craft due to various purposes, because the people who are still practicing the particular craft, they are the people who are dealing with the difficulties of indulging in it in an everyday basis. So it's not easy. Like 100 kilometers from here, we have Muradabad, and brass etching is being practiced there. So many people have left the profession because it is not profitable anymore. Mass production and industrialization have taken over the craft in many ways. So uh, it should still the ownership still lies with the people who are still producing the products. Other people can still debate about it. We can make the craftspeople aware, but um, meaning if they are not having an issue with you know, uh, international brands appropriating their crafts, or they are able to make a market out of it and get a PR out of it, it's not so much of a problem, like Shivani had already mentioned. That's just my opinion.
Hi, can I speak? Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. I totally agree with Divya ji. There are who does craft belong to? According to me, there are three stakeholders. One is the artisans, the craft people, and the other is the seller. The third is the consumer. And I also work with the artisans and the craft people. I strongly agree with Divya ji and strongly believe that it belongs to craft people who make it. Because the seller can sell other handicrafts also. He can sell metal, hand textiles. He can sell many other. He has options. The seller has many options to sell. The craft person has only one. Even the consumer has many options. He can buy many handicrafts, but the craft person he makes only one craft. So I think strongly believe that the craft belongs to the craft person.
I think,
Interesting.
sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I feel that there's something else going on. I'm not able to connect the dots perfectly, but I think there's something going on with the fact that there are very few people from non-craft backgrounds or non-maker backgrounds who are choosing to get deep into the process of making. And it's become a sort of like caste system of sorts. Well, not sorry, scratch that. I don't mean that. But there become so many rules and politics surrounding it. And I also think that there's some hang up that a lot of people who come from formal education have about rolling up their sleeves and getting to learn the technique and do it themselves. So, bringing it back to the Prada example, just to tether it to an example, is that I think that were we to have more designers or even business owners saying, okay, I'm going to get into the nitty gritty of making a kolhapuri, like, can we design a sole that's a little thicker? Like, let's have the classic kolhapuris and let's have deviations from that, like what makes it a traditional kolhapuri? How can I take that method of braiding leather strips and, knotting them together and stitching them together to create a boot that's kolhapuri inspired? Now, somebody who just says, I'm a business person, I think that sustainability in shoes, there's a huge void in the market for that, I'm going to start a business here, they'll never get into this. And by and by, we seem to becoming a country of largely traders and business people rather than makers and creative manufacturers. And there's a huge problem in that. And the only issue I have with, I think, Amar, it's what you said. The only issue I have with the fact that only this rule that only craftspeople can practice craft is it that it reinforces that divide. So in the last few years, I started learning how to weave. And there are two techniques that I've learned, and one of them is a backstrap loom. Backstrap weaving is done in hilly areas of Central and South America. It's done in parts of Africa, and it's done in the Himalayan region of India, going all the way to Southeast Asia. Each community has a different color palette they use. The motifs that they weave in the extra weft are completely different. But once you learn the backstrap technique, you learn that it's only the warp can be seen. If you want to add in a motif, it's extra weft. They're all these. It's characterized by a certain high level of pixelation. You can spot a backstrap weave from any part of the world once you learn it. But I don't want to be told that I shouldn't learn how to weave a backstrap, on a backstrap loom just because my parents weren't craftspeople, because that's another kind of caste system. But anyway, the larger point is that I wish that there were more people who are makers, because then our conversations would be slightly less tilted towards the politics and more weight on the actual making and talking about process and materials. Yeah, I'll stop.
Yeah, so since the discussion kick-started from the Kolhapuri situation, firstly, the credit situation, what I mentioned was mostly financial credit rather than just the naming of the practice, because that is much more of value to the artisans who are actually doing the work. And secondly, I completely agree with Anaka that it is indeed a caste system in that regard, because specifically in Kolhapuri itself, because it is done by Dalit workers, and it is very important to see that the very, mere sense of power that they had over their own livelihood, if that gets snatched away from them, that is something to be taken care of, which is, of course, in a broader context, it can be either way. Either they are appropriating or making it popular, right? Other than that, there's also a disregard for the non-essential practices in India itself, which extends down to art, which extends down to craft, and that is how we lose the value of who does it and how they do it, and that becomes a whole another class of people who are actually giving a damn about how it's happening, and there's another class of people who are just surviving, and they do not want to deep dive into it of what craft is working or not. So, and that also brings in the whole area of AI being a perpetrator in that regard, because if we just consider graphic design, let's say, right? So if somebody is, designing a logo or designing a motif of a particular craft, earlier they used to be given a well amount of time, let's say for a week or so. And now, because they have people have AI, so they see that the design is just one click away. And now they would not value the amount of time that is required for the creative process itself, because, as you said, the non-creative people are keeping themselves away from the territory of getting into craft, or they are either segregated because it is the non-essential area of the life that is not encouraged as such in the country itself. So yeah, and we can see that in both regards, in two different directions. Because if we see like likes of Gully Lab, right? So they are picking up the visuals of the craft that we have, and they are commercializing it in a way that is palpable to the younger generation, which makes them popular. But then there's another side of the actual craft that is being used by the artisans and produced by the artisans, which does not have the market at all. So the fusion does exist and it is profiteering, but the pure, not pure, but like the actual ancient craft that has been practiced in current scenario, that is not being profitable because that commercialization exists in that context. Yeah.
Can I come in? I was thinking about the caste system that you guys bring out. I mean, of course, there's a history of caste system with craft, art, goes back few hundred years from now, right? But then I would say I would probably tweak it to, instead of caste system, I see a certain amount of hierarchy that's there. Not necessarily linear hierarchy, top bottom, but certain hierarchy where I see the people who knows the craft, who knows how to make it, has also the least amount of power and dynamism to sell it, right? And that's what the issue creates. Now, if you fly back a few hundred uh, centuries ago, there were patrons of art, right, who propagated art in various forms and all. Now that became slightly more egalitarian, which is basically everyone can get a piece of that particular art. Like, for example, it could be muslin, the finest of the muslin. It was only worn by people who could afford it. And normal people never wore a muslin. How much ever you want to buy muslin now, yes, you can pay huge amount, and it could be with any Banarasis were made of gold and woven with gold, silver threads. And normal people back 500 years or even 200 years, let's say, could not afford a gold Banarasi. They like, and hence it's an heirloom. If you have a Banarasi sari or a Banarasi or a Rangkat or any of those things, because it's a heirloom, because it's been passed on for generation, hence the value increases, right? Now with the society where everybody and everyone wants to consume everything, the question rises where we stand, which brings me to the point of, if anyone wants to make a Kolhapuri inspired boot, will I call it an art or will I call it a craft? Maybe, probably in the next 100 years, yeah. If that's sustained, why not, right? And hence, it doesn't, to answer the question, who do craft belong to? It doesn't belong to anyone traditionally. It belongs to the person who practices it. Yes, there are people who practice it day in and day out, and that's their livelihood. But then if you come up with something and that becomes your day in, that becomes your way to navigate the craft, it belongs to you as well, right? One example is there's a brand called Napa Dori. They're doing some beautiful craft work with leather, not traditional at all, right? No motive whatsoever, traditional way. Heitzine do some beautiful crime. Does that mean it doesn't belong to them? It does, right? They are doing equally. It's the essence that need to be retained, which is basically what they are doing, how they are doing it. Like, for example, with indigo, I can do indigo I remember, I don't know if it was Chanel or someone who did a few years ago, they did indigo inspired denims, but then each trousers, for at least from a distance, it looked like an indigo dye, but then each were beaded basically, like smaller indigo strips cut together, and then the entire trousers is beaded. Well, they took it that way. Doesn't mean they haven't worked with the craft. They understood the craft, they understood what the material is, they understood how it reacts, works, and things like that. And hence they put in the work to do it. Right. So I think that's what my I'm slightly diabolical in terms of understanding who it belongs to. It could belong to anyone given in you put in the effort to understand it, right? Understand it not for the sake of awareness, but to put in the work, right? Put it in the hours. Coming to AI now, there is a huge amount of ethical issue in it. Can I make a pattern and create a brocade in Banarasi, Kanjivaram? You can. Will it be authentic enough? Is what the question is, and but that's a topic for another day possibly. Like, but then that's with any art spaces in that case. So yeah, that's my point.
Your microphone is on.
I realize that just now. I agree with what Soham has just said, and Anakhaji, actually, I think you got Amarji wrong. I don't think he was telling that craft belongs to certain communities. It was more about crafts people, that is, people who are actually involved in the practice of craft. So, what you said was right, that if you are doing backstrap loom weaving, and you're able to make a livelihood out of it, or even if you're not, it would the technique and your ability to do it would still make you a craftsperson. It's not because you belong to a certain caste or a community. And while we all disagree with the caste system, the one good thing that actually caste system has done in history is to make sure that these crafts were propagated and preserved, and you know they have even evolved uh, under them. It was yeah right now, you know it has gone on a different tangent and people are being exploited. So um, we don't know how it was in the past. I'm not one to comment on that. I
Sorry,
don't support the
Divya, can I
idea.
come in? I mean, they have been exploited back then also. People who were
Yeah, probably,
wearing
probably they have
mushroom,
been.
who were wearing, I mean, they never had the authority or that agency to wear those. They were only making it for
No, I
someone
agree with you,
higher up,
Soham.
right?
That is not what I'm saying. I'm
Right.
not disagreeing with you. What
No,
I'm
no, no, I'm not
saying is,
disagreeing. Sorry, I'm not disagreeing at all.
caste has a role in creating these crafts as well and making them what they are today. So yes, while we might agree to disagree with parts of it, uh, the history cannot be disputed. That's my only point.
Well, I did promise that I'm going to keep my camera and my microphone switched off, but this is too tempting a discussion. I think I had the hardest 40 minutes of my life trying to keep my mouth shut.
We're
But
happy to
yes,
have you, Prita.
I'm not going to offer my opinion, but I would just like your opinion on something since we are discussing Kolhapuri and since we have just touched upon caste. As we all know, that traditionally Kolhapuri creation has been practiced by the Dalit community of Maharashtra and Northern Karnataka, and they are severely oppressed. Now, when this Kolhapuri debacle happened, a lot of conversation was on, oh, we get this in Sarojini market for 100 rupees. Oh, we have seen XYZ, a very famous posh Indian born brand endorsed by Bollywood celebrities who are making these Kolhapuris. Now, Anyone who sort of knows about how craft works knows that they most probably are manufactured in Agra, which is far from the oppressed Dalit community of Maharashtra and northern Karnataka. So what we are trying to promote against Pratha Kolhapuri are not technically Kolhapuri as per GI, and not technically Kolhapuri if we are to give agency to the original makers as well. So I would like to hear your opinion on this. Before I switch off my microphone and camera again and try to stick to my promise.
I can pitch in here. I know we are trying to establish the fact that who owns the craft, right? If we move a little bit from there and think, can we democratize art, right? So, for example, in literature, whoever is the author, of a book or a poem, we refer that. That's kind of a so-called ownership in that way, right? This is his novel or her novel. If we come to science, we know, okay, this is the inventor, who invented light bulb or telephone or, like that, right? But we have also evolved and, then we utilize that science in different way and then it gets probably democratized. I would say that if there is, acknowledgement that uh, this is a Maithili painting and Maithili art. And then probably that art gets democratized in different ways, right? Through different brands, So I don't know which one is the correct, in the sense of ownership of it, but the acknowledgement and the recognition is probably critical. If Prada did acknowledge in the very beginning that, we are doing these chappals, but they are made by so and it origins from there. I don't know. Like, would it be different? I mean, I'm just asking and, putting that forward here.
I just wanted to pitch in here. I am also from Agra, so I do see a lot of factories or a lot of outlets doing for a lot of well-known brands outside, and having an export business of itself, of course, because this is the leather industry. And as she said, that it is far away from the story that has been told about that particular craft. I would like to see any craft in a similar conjecture of a film project, right? So it's not of a director, it's not of a particular actor, it's not of a writer, it's a combined project. Whoever touches it have like contribution to that particular art form or the craft. The idea of consolidating the credit of that particular craft or an art piece to a conglomerate, somebody who is selling that bit, is something, even though diabolical to consider, still it is contributing in the popularity or the propagation of that craft itself. So let's say, as Anaka said, that she has started you know uh, diving into a craft which is found in different parts of the world. So in whatever way she is taking up those motives or taking up those techniques, in whichever way she is doing, she is contributing to that craft as the maker. But if, let's say, she would have taken a motif outside, somewhere from Etsy, and just slapped it on a digital piece, and then sold it outside, even though she is unethical in that regard, but she is popularizing that particular motive. So that was the intent that I started the collaborative discussion itself. Yes. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
Shivani, you are opening the bottle of worm here. Saying the word ethics.
I think there's, well, I'm going to let Sushmita talk first. She has her hand up.
Thank you. I was actually, responding more to your point, Anaka. I think a lot of discussion has happened since. So I run a brand of pre-loved sarees. My motivation for starting it was not that I loved the craft or I was an expert on it. It was minimalism and circular economy. But as I got into it, I got deeper into understanding motives, into understanding which ones were more rare, which ones were more recent, where had the change happened. So now I can, I think, differentiate a couple of, still not an expert, but I think it just helped me price them right and ensure that the seller also got, her due. So, like for example, a Kattam Kanjivaram to a Veldari Kanjivaram, or the Gauss motives of Assam. So I'm saying we may not always start off being experts on it, but if there's interest, then we can always go deeper into it and kind of educate as we go along. So a larger set of people who are consumers or buyers also benefit from that knowledge. Not because when I used to buy saris for myself, it was driven purely by aesthetics and occasion. I didn't go so much into detail. But now I understand why I need to go into the detail, and I have been educating myself, and there are experts helping me on the way. That was what I wanted to say. Thanks.
I think that the question of who craft belongs to gets a bit complicated if we only say it belongs to anybody who's practicing it, because a lot of I mean, if you look especially at how a fabric is woven, there's so much technology and so much thought that's gone into from the time man invented string to the time man invented textile, right? And people have worked on this all over the world, and different communities came up with a lot of symbolism in their textiles. And with backstrap weaving, especially in India, it's particularly interesting because Nagaland, where I've spent a lot of time, Nagaland, unlike a Banaras or a Maheshwar or most of Kutch, does not have a history of making textiles for commercial use. Only until the last maybe 50, 60 years. They were really minimalist. They only made textiles for their own family use. And so a lot of textiles and motifs are associated with certain rituals. And they have a lot of rules, like this particular shawl can only be worn by a man who comes from a family that has given the village a feast 9 times in a year, like elaborate rules. And they're absolutely fine if I take, like elements of a motif and draw upon that and do something different. But they are very strict that, especially me as a non-Naga, I can't weave a lot of what they call sacred motifs or motifs that are associated with rituals. And I respect that because I think that that's not just a pretty looking design. It's not just something that technically anybody who learns backstrap weaving can weave. Of course they can, but for them it means something more, and it does. In that case, it belongs to the people of that area who collectively came up with that motive.
Yeah, I think can I take your point, Hanaka? And somebody also mentioned about the Pipli art, the applique, I believe, from Orissa, and said, can we modernize it? I think this is exactly what I was talking about. Is you want to modernize it at what cost? Modernize it to please your aesthetic of the house? Is that what modernizing mean to you? Does modernizing mean it goes with the trend that's happening now with the interior or whatever it is, boho chic or whatever it is, and without actually knowing what modernizing mean? As you rightly said, I come from Arunachal. I've spent significant growing up years in Arunachal and Shillong, and I understand what social hierarchy means through fabric. There is, and even the housings are made in a certain way that people living in certain kind of house means a social status, and that's how society function. It still function in a certain way, right, whether we acknowledge it or not. Now when we have to alienate that context, as I said, and then bring it out saying, yo, I love the fish motive, let me put it in my scarf. I mean, you can, and then walk the street of New York. Yes, you can. People would love it, right, because they don't know the context, right? But can you walk it in where you have pulled it out from? Like, for example, like a lot of Maharashtrian MP, there are a lot of people who have tattoos all over their bodies. I have seen in Dastakar in Delhi people pulling out those motifs and putting it on shawls, scarves, and things like that. Is that cultural appropriation? Is that what you are giving credit for? is what the question is. But then I'm very, very aware that I am speaking from a very, I'm speaking from a pedestal, right? I'm almost like as we like to call people like us is champagne socialist, right? We will talk about, oh my god, my maid's kid, like they need to go to school, they need to do anything, but I will not do anything, right? Because I have the privilege, I can say about all these things. But do I walk a mile in the people's shoes and understand what the context they are driving from, and then give that appropriation? And that would be the right thing to do in terms of craft as well, right? I think that becomes funny is we love things, but we don't like things the way they are. We want to appropriatize it according to our own likings, and that's what the issue it becomes. And it becomes slightly unethical in terms of what do you like is based on your perception of what you have seen, read, or things like that, and not necessarily everything that they have gone through to create that particular element. I think that's where it gets murky, is giving agency and giving credit. So yeah, that's my 2 minutes.
Just one point on these sacred motifs. Uh, it's just my observation. You may not agree with me, but I feel um, if you agree with sacred motifs being used for the purpose of fashion and not just for the meaningful way in which they are meant to be used, then I think you should also be all right with having blasphemy laws.
Having what?
I mean, yeah, because see, blasphemy and non-use of sacred motives actually go hand in hand. When you can hurt somebody's, faith or their perception of faith uh, by just weaving a motif in a fabric, then you mean you should also be agreeing with the fact that you're not supposed to be um, speaking against certain aspects of religion or be blasphemous. These things are parallel, and I think most of us will agree to not use a motive, but we cannot keep our mouth shut when it comes to the same thing in the context of religious texts and religion as such. So, the people you had talked about, Nagas, I don't know what the religion is. I feel it is nature worship. Uh, so,
It used to be animism, and now they're all Christian. But like with any culture that
that's
assimilates, it's an amalgamation.
that's fine. Yeah. So, if you should be able to use these sacred motifs, then you should also be okay with blasphemy. I'm not talking about you in particular. I'm talking about the community that this motif is originating from. Uh, and that's not just for the Naga community. I'm applying it across the board.
Just adding in a bit here. I think the context also matters in that regard because a few years back I saw, there was some outfit, some costume that was created with a motif of Kalima that was used with bright colors, and it was sort of non-modest, whatever people talk consider that non-modest imagery, but the context for that was that it was supposed to be empowering for the person who's wearing it, because it was kind of having autonomy over your own body, and having assertion over your own body, and that was the context of the motive that was borrowed. So if that is separated from the imagery itself, there was a lot of people who were in that particular post comment section were bashing the creator, but in the very essence of why it was created and what made the designer or the artist to even choose that motive, was because the motif holds that kind of power. The motif holds that kind of meaning for the person who is creating it. So that largely depends on the context it's been used. Of course, if it's been used for an, let's say, underwear, that should account for blasphemy. But if it's used in a way that the context sets up with the motive that uh, goes with the history of that particular motive, or goes with the history or the meaning that holds for that particular creator, I think then that's a very blurry line in that regard. I won't say that you can actually identify it properly, because that the intentions matter in that regard. Yeah.
I think if I can add a couple of things. First of all, I can see there are a total of 20 participants, and 8 of us, including me, are on video. So if others have anything to add, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll let you in. The second thing that I cannot help myself again, um, stretching from the brief mention of blasphemy laws, and tribal imagery. As you know, most of the tribes say they are nature worshippers. So a lot of their motives are derived from nature, right? So if I'm someone who is benefiting from their tribal aesthetics, whether as a wearer or whether as a seller, do I then by default have some responsibility to be their advocate as well? Because nature, especially in tribal areas which are being heavily mined, is under threat. What is then my responsibility, not just as someone who claims ownership as a consumer or as someone who's selling, but also as someone who's directly benefiting from it? I'd like to hear your views on that.
Can I go in this? I was thinking, ethically, yes, it is your responsibility, not because someone said it, but because you have deliberately chosen in to explore that community and extract certain motives and then use it for commercial gain, right? So in a way, yes, it does puts you in a position of authority, puts you in a position of you are responsible for it. But then I understand that's not the case with many things. We only lot of brands mostly think about the commercial aspect and not necessarily about what goes around showing that element, which is probably very sacred, personal, and just making it, and not just making it commercial, right? I'll give an example of. So in Assam, there is a particular bird species called hargila, right? Hargila in Assamese, har means bone and gila means to dissolve, right? This particular stroke of bird, there are birds which are strokes basically who act as a natural cleaner for the environment, right? This bird was on extinct, and this was about 20 years, just very recently. Group of community came in. They started preserving it through various uh, song, dance, action, things like that. One of the products they came up with is weaving Hargila bird motif onto gamcha. Right? I'm sure you guys know because you guys are way more ahead of the craft area, which is an Assamese gamcha. Right? And Assamese gamcha generally traditionally will have motifs which are very particular to the particular region. Most of them will have a pangani and a gamcha. But then they started making this as one of their more what it did essentially is because while they were putting this product onto various platforms across India and abroad as well, it gave them a voice to express why they have created that, right? Which is basically the story. Now, when I say story, I don't mean story which is fluff. This is a story which is rooted in ground reality, and it has certain significance, it has certain earnest to it, and hence it's sold. 20 years down the line, Hargila is no more extinct, is no more endangered. It's thriving in its natural sphere, which means the biodiversity has been restored to a certain extent, right? And that's the earnest storytelling I'm talking about, and that's the accountability element I'm talking about, right? Yes, you can pull out any motive that appeases you, but then are you truly honest about where it came from and why did you like it, right? And that's not necessarily always the case, right? Because also from an understanding perspective, we human beings are extremely lazy, right? We are extremely lazy human beings, right? We want to do the minimum amount of work, be it reading, be it understanding, be it even empathizing, right? But we need money. We want to sell. What's the best thing and the best way to sell? Create a story which appeases the larger mass, right? And that becomes the issue, and that becomes the non-ethical element of it, right? Of course, there are brands who are doing amazing work, have a narrative which are very, very grounded to what the actual realities are, but not necessarily that's always the case of things. And then we create what we say is a fusion clothing, or I don't know, contemporary clothing in the name of that. But yeah, that's my take on it.
If I can pitch in here, as you spoke about, the monetary side also, right? So when I think about who does craft belong to, so who is making money from it, right? So we buy something. I mean, if I ask someone, "Oh, where is this kurta comes from?" and they say it's Fab India's kurta, right? It's so everything becomes, it's about, say, Fab India, or in the West, I don't know, Zara or anything, right? So are the brands, like, how is the money trickling down to the owners or the creators or the community of it? And and are the brands acknowledging, the creators that much? When I walk into a Fab India store, does it really categorically acknowledge in that way, right? That, this is from this region. This is, the art belongs to, it's Ajrak art, or, so it would be good to hear from you from that part, that A, on the monetary part of it, and B, on what can be done so that, it trickles down more to the communities, so that, the financial ownership or the financial inclusion part of it comes.
Sorry, can I pitch in for literally a minute before anyone is? I mean, I see two aspects, and I think I started the conversation with what will you do as a consumer walking in a Fab India store, and they have a shelf saying, okay, this is sourced from the Bastar region, this is sourced from Bishnupur, and saying, like, what would you do as a customer? You are not bothered. And that's the thing with most of the consumer. Even if I see a chit saying, okay, this is weaved by XYZ, and this she comes from this and he comes from that, and do we read that? And if we read that, how do we ensure that the money is fair trade as a consumer? Yes, it flatters me to think, okay, I'm buying it from a fair trade, but okay, if that's a flattery we want, I mean, yes, good and good. One thing the second part is, mm, lot of social media influencer or people who post on social, I mean, including Pritha as well. I remember every time I see a video, she'll put up a number of the artisans and things like that. And I think that's more democratizing than seeing it on a showroom and saying, oh, this is done by XYZ person from this village. She has three sons and XYZ, whatever. As a consumer, I don't have the time, I don't have the mind space, neither have I have the intellect to understand. I'm like, okay, as long as I'm getting my baluchari, I'm good at a nominal rate, right?
I think
Unless and until you go with a budget which is open sky budget, then yeah.
I'd like to
Sorry,
add a couple of
that's
lines
me.
here, if that's okay, before we proceed. As someone who has been in the social media sphere for a while, not just as a content creator, but as a content consumer, and has been through the hoop of sari consumerism and sari group, all that lot. Um, I feel some of it, I may be completely mistaken, but I feel some of it, as you said, what are you going to do with the information? You go to Fab India and you find that this is a bark print sari. What are you going to do with the information? Some of it maybe just to discuss this with friends or write on social media that look, I'm wearing a bark print sari. This was made in the district of Dhar in Madhya Pradesh, and the Bagh river flows through it. Some of it may just be some kind of a validation of feeling good about oneself by convincing ourselves that we are owning a part of India's cultural heritage or getting validation from others. But I do completely agree with you, Soham, that I feel I often, when people do send me these I get all sorts of private messages, and I often think, why is it important for you to get this information? Why is it important for you to know who exactly made this sari? Because often when I go to weavers, I visit master weavers, right? And I show the saris. And this, I don't know if everyone realizes this, that the sari that I'm showing sitting in the home of a master weaver may not probably was not woven by the master weaver or his sons or his daughters. It probably was woven by a village by a weaver of their village, but not by the exact people. So it literally, I mean, it exactly is how the English saying goes, it takes a village. It takes a village to weave a piece of textile or create a piece of traditional arts. And it may not be the exact person who is being shown in my video. But obviously, it's Instagram, it's short form content. I don't have the time to explain every single thing. Those who know. At some point, I may write a post, but no one reads my posts anyways. So I'm back to square one. But I guess some part of knowing where it comes from is also to feel better about ourselves. Not everyone is going to be as invested in knowing the origin of crafts as some of the rest. But one thing I see, we have got 20 minutes left. So there's one particular question that I'd really want to ask the group, because we are discussing ownership of crafts. Those who have been following sari weavers for the last few years, especially the weavers of ikat weaving technique. Now, ikat, many of us may know, is thought to have developed concurrently in many different parts of the world together, from Southeast Asia to South Asia to South America, even. And often we find Indian ikat sari weavers making Cambodian ikats, using Cambodian ikat motifs to make. So, what are you going to call those products? Indian, Cambodian, something completely else, modern fusion? I'd like to hear what you think about that.
Preeta, can I just quickly touch upon what you just said? Because I have a different point of view on the stories. We started the first online sari group long time back, 15, 20 years back. And I see a growing interest in stories. People today are very interested in knowing how, given that, especially that, a state has so many different motives. So they want to understand motives, they want to understand where it comes from. So there is a growing, maybe to feel good, maybe to say, I already have this kind of motive in Ikat. Now let me try and get something else in Ikat. So maybe it comes from having more variety, but there is definitely a growing interest in stories.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
It-
I want to continue with what Pritha mentioned about the Cambodian ikat motif that we pick up, uh, and make it as something Indian in that regard. Uh, that is again, I still feel that it again comes back to that what exactly makes it popular. How is it being popular? It's how is it reaching to the masses? The accessibility of the motifs, the accessibility of the techniques, the accessibility of the profit that reaches to the people who are doing it. That creates an ecosystem for the craft itself, and how that crafts get propagated outside of the country, outside of the region, outside of the localized center of that craft. So that creates a much more significant impact than just having information about it. Let's say if we see the trend cycle of the craft called chicken curry, right? Chicken curry has been a craft that was made for royals. It was such a intricate craft, it was such a time-taken craft that it was made for royals, it was made for elites. Then it trickled down to being a machine-made, embroidery, which became so popular that it reached to a point of having an association with the derogatory N word in India, right? And now it is considered as something, embarrassing if that is the one thing that you're choosing, at least in the younger circle that I see that, okay, this is so popular that it doesn't command that level of separation from the commercial and craft. So again, the whole idea that what craft does belong to us and what craft are we borrowing from also is centered around how is it reaching to people, how is it accessible to people, how is it how people are even able to perceive the existence of that craft. So yeah.
Sorry, can I come in?
Sorry, I think Kanan has hands
Go ahead,
there.
Kanan.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Just a brief introduction. I'm Kanan Mehta, and since I'm speaking for the first time, I thought I'll introduce myself. I'm an anthropologist by training. I've been very interested in handlooms, but just like Soham, how you mentioned, my interest comes a lot from seeing what my parents wore and how they were interested in it, but then also reading about it. Just a few quick points here. This is a very engaging discussion, and Pritha, thank you for creating this platform. But just thinking about all the points that everyone is making. To Prada's point, I think the outcry was not so much about why they are making it, but that they need to be more forthcoming about where from where they are inspired, or um, where is it coming from essentially. um, I think when we talk about things like does the consumer even know, is the consumer even interested? Yes, there is, I think, a good deal of people who may not necessarily pay attention, but I think there is also a substantial amount of people who do. I do think that as far as the issue of preservation is concerned, I think in order to protect something, one needs to be able to identify with it, whether it's on an individual level or a regional level or a country level. I do agree with the point that was made about how certain motives can have a specific cultural, religious context. So I think context really matters here. If it's something that's really sacred to a particular community, then it needs to be dealt in that manner. Um, and I think just one more point in terms of with all the points that we have touched, I think one issue that has not come up is the issue of fast fashion. So, for example, I'm part of a few WhatsApp groups where some family members are now into doing their own business in terms of selling salwar kameez materials, and often I see these descriptions of sari and pichwai art and jamdani suit material, and then the price is a couple of hundred rupees at 1200, 2000, 700. It varies. And then when I've spoken to them about how is it priced, where do you get it from, and they're like, oh no, it's wholesale, so that's why we're able to sell it at this particular price. Or that if you are in Chandigarh, which is where I was born and brought up, then depending upon what particular um, circle of clients they're dealing with is how they price it, based on, oh, the quality of the fabric is better and the embroidery is better on this one, so this is going to be priced this much. But if the same thing is being sold in Ambala, it goes a couple of hundred rupees cheaper. And it's very interesting to hear those conversations and look at that. So as passionate as I feel about handloom, um, it just had me thinking. I was like, do these people like really know? Are they aware? The people who are selling it and the people who are buying it, do they know like what Jamdani is? Where does it originate from? Is Jamdani primarily done on suit materials, or is it actually, where does it originate from? So there is the question of, when we talk about neoliberal economies and the systems of consumption and marketing and ownership, how are we addressing that? Because to me, this is basically fast fashion. It's getting manufactured somewhere in some factory, being labeled as something, and then just being sold to a bunch of people. Now, to the people who are selling it, for them, it's a form of generating additional income or gaining financial security. But is that reason, justification alone to to have that run the way it is? Or is it on such a small micro level that it doesn't matter? Like, does it not, can we say, okay, this does not have much of an impact if there's a small group of people sitting somewhere in part of the country buying something, it doesn't matter. So I just think it's multiple questions. I think as far as the fluidity of handloom is concerned, who did what, who created what, yes, we can't possibly trace every single thing. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. For example, the paisley motif, which a lot of us feel like so passionate about, but that's like shared heritage between Persia and India, as far as uh, my understanding goes. So that is something, where we might not be able to claim exclusive ownership. So I think over there, it's fair to admit that yes, it comes from both. We don't know where it was borrowed from or where it originated, but this is what it is. So I think so I don't think it's like a black and white definition of ownership. I think it's context specific. But then I think it's also about looking at the different systems of economy, where they are coming from, and then how do we do justice to them as consumers and as learners and as scholars, and maybe as entrepreneurs, if there are those in this group as well. I don't want to take a lot of time because I sort of like came towards the tail end, but this was such a wonderful discussion. I was like, I have to speak up. So on to someone else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kanan, for coming here and being a part of this. As you mentioned, you asked, does it make an impact? It does make an impact because a large portion of the fashion industry revolves under, within the middle class circles that actually, participates in the fast fashion segment that you mentioned. I just wanted to share an anecdote that my mother went to shop for a sari, right? And she brought something which had a print of Patan Patola, right? And she said this was something that Neeta Ambani wore, so I really wanted to have this piece. When she brought it up, I told her that how much time it takes and how intricate the whole craft is. And since she got to know that, okay, this is worth this much, this is worth, over lakhs and lakhs of money, she got really excited about how much the craft itself holds, right? So she shared that information with at least four of her friends, even though she was not aware of the craft itself at all. So in that perspective, I would say that even just the propagation of the art itself, gave us a dialogue to even have that mention. Otherwise, I would not have had a conversation about Patan Patola with her in any other context, right? So that was something. And also in fast fashion regard, I think the accountability, as Pritha mentioned, the accountability of the environment is, of course, is a collective effort, but it cannot, uh, wholly depend on the consumer itself, because a lot of people who do consume fast fashion do not do it out of their admiration for the product. They do it out of the necessity of the using those things. Like, we do see a lot of fashion influencers bringing piles and piles of Shein and H&M and Zara stuff. But if we actually see people around us, they are bargaining on which one to buy just to survive through the month, right? So people who are uh, diving into and contributing into the sales of fast fashion, a good chunk of them are doing it just out of necessity, and a good chunk of them are not using those resources as something frivolously, right? So in the context of having an environmental accountability, I think that should not reside just with the consumer. It should be with the whole ecosystem, whether it's a supplier, whether it's a manufacturer, whether it's a producer of that particular craft. Everybody can contribute bit by bit. Of course, as a consumer, you can contribute it not consuming at the rate of overconsumption, but every cycle of that process is participating in creating an impact. And again, yeah, so like even that tidbit of the way that the economies, as you mentioned, and the systems that are running the whole industry and running the, as already mentioned, the exploitative practices of these things. Sustainability just does not account for the environmental factor. It also accounts for the ethics of how we are taking resources from people, from communities, from the natural resources that we have. So in that regard, it's a holistic way that we have to look at when we are practicing the business, in whichever capacity that we are practicing it, and in whichever way we can contribute, instead of having a very black and white rule around that. Yeah.
Can I just because Abhishek has recently joined and we have 5 minutes left, can we listen to what Abhishek has to say? Abhishek, you can unmute yourself.
Uh, sure, ma'am. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'm actually a chemical engineer by training, and I have just started my journey as a research assistant at a scientific institute. But I do have like a lot of interest in fabrics and culture, and I owe it to my mother, my grandmothers, who have often accompanied to their shopping sprees. This is completely different from the field I'm working in, but I joined very lately in this meeting. I'm sorry for that. And I heard that Anand ma'am and he ma'am were talking about fast fashion, right? I would like to share an observation from my end because me and my mother share a common Facebook page, and we have encountered multiple pages. And generally, these pages are from villagers. Like my grandmother is from Katwa, Daihat, and many women from her they have gained the economic stability by selling that machine printed, like they are selling batik kantha at 300 rupees, and that is kind of a clickbait for middle class families like us. We generally we visited them once, and they have like they used to live in very small huts. I remember when I visited them early, but now when we visited their shops, they have like gained, they have made good like houses, their children are studying. So there's kind of a dilemma, like where we should choose. Like on one hand, like recently Prithamam came up with a post that hand printed one, like hand printed a machine. That there was one social media influencer who was focusing that machine printed fabrics. They are like constrained to the handcrafts. But the dilemma that I have facing is like where should that boundary start? Like how should we like on one hand we can see like a friend of mine, she's from Andhra Pradesh. She didn't know like what is Katha, what is they are ordering they are knowing about the stuffs just because they are now cheaply about affordable. They are knowing about the stuffs. Her mother has got a Katha stitch from that same woman. Also, when we go to Sonachuri in Santiniketan, I remember there you can see they are all machine like Katha. They are selling at 500. It's very the original price we have. I have got some from my mother with my first income. So when my mother saw that, she was like, "Why you are getting such a heavy price thing?" I said, "This is the real handloom that you should get." But again, that brings in dilemma. So that was my personal experience, and also I'm very thankful to Prita ma'am for bringing such a long table, because someone like me, I have never found such a discussion where I could like speak about my like my experiences, my observations. In a scientific institute, we generally discuss about real science, and they like what I'm like working with is like real science. They are not working with the real world. So I think that this type of things help like people like us to come and discuss things that we really observe. And I guess to live in a world like in an economy like India, we need to like open our mind, and as we should be like, we always state about being multitasking, like we should be doing everything. But what we really need is like broadening our mind and taking up different things. Thanks again for everyone who have joined this, and I'm really thankful for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abhishek. And the topic that you briefly touched upon, that is something that I feel that is very close to my heart. That often when there's this discussion about real versus fake handloom, I cannot stop myself from thinking about all the women who achieve financial freedom from reselling. That's why when people complain to me about resellers, and there's a whole narrative of resellers being the scum of the earth and evil incarnated. But the primary reason why I feel short of judging them is because I do know for certain that in a country which is deeply patriarchal, sari reselling, something that women are able to do from the comfort of their home, where they have quote unquote permission from their in laws and their husbands, it has given a lot of women financial freedom. That is that I think I'm going to make that a topic for a dedicated long table discussion instead of having just the final 5 minutes. Of this one. It merits an entire discussion by itself. We are almost at the end. In fact, it has been 90 minutes. But before I end, obviously, as I anticipated, we do not have a conclusion, but I think we probably are all in agreement about where we stand in regards to cultural appropriation and appreciation. But there's just something that I would like to mention. When I had made a post about Kolhapuri chappals, I did not directly address the issue of Prada because at that time I did not have full information about what had actually happened. And I prefer to have information before coming to any conclusion. I do not want to react. I mean, I'm not an emotional person per se. I'm almost like a robot in that sense, but that's a story for another day. But anyway, when I had made the post, someone I actually hate the word follower. It makes me feel like a spiritual dodgy guru. So that's not a word that I want to use. But someone who happens to follow me, and I do not remember who it is. I'm really sorry. I do not remember the name, but someone had written to me that Gandhar statues, the statues of Buddha from Gandhar period, which is at least 2000, which are at least 2000 years old, they do have footwear that are very similar to Kolhapuri chappals. And when I got this message, I actually looked in it, and that is true. And there's also a research paper on it. I must admit, I've been lazy. I've downloaded it, but I have not read that yet. But that may be a homework for all of us to look into how Gandhar statues may have influenced the evolution of Kolhapuri chappals. That will add an entirely new dimension to this whole who do traditional crafts actually belongs to. Ria, I've seen you have just joined, but I'm afraid we have reached 90 minutes, and I hope you can join us next time for our next long table discussion. I'm full of a lot of ideas, but first and foremost, I want to thank each and every one of you. This was a wonderful discussion. It surpassed all of my expectations, and I'm pumped up to have this at least once every month because I learned so much from what all of you had to say. I hope the other listeners also found it fruitful. If you have suggestion about topics, please do send me messages. Um, so I'll keep a list of the suggested topics, and then every month I'm going to pick up one, and I'm sure there are going to be some common topics that people will suggest. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, and I am going to upload this on my YouTube and share the link. As you know, Instagram links can only be shared on stories, so I hope that is going to be okay for you.